When I'm asked about what is therapy, my answer is that it's about relationship, which sounds obvious, I think, right? But more importantly, it's about our relationship. If you and I are working together, or when I'm working with a client, what happens is that the interactions that we have starts to reveal patterns of relating. And that the idea is that what you're doing in your life and how you interact and relate to other people, that's the way you're going to interact and relate with me. And we really get a chance then, almost like an experiment in honesty or an experiment in vulnerability, an experiment of you getting to be yourself. And through that process, you can practice changing those patterns or looking at specifically like where did those patterns come from. Now, clients who see me reach out for very specific reasons. Feeling stuck, feeling triggered, and also the third one is feeling crushed. And what all of this means is that they're disconnected. If you're stuck, you're disconnected from resource. If you're triggered, you're disconnected from a feeling of calm. And then also to be crushed is to be disconnected from a relationship. I once was taking a bus. This was many years ago. I had just had this relationship. It wasn't even a relationship. It never even really got off the ground. It was full of potential, but it was exciting. It was my first, but it ended in a heartbreak. And I was going from New York City, where I was living at the time for school, and going back to Ohio to my family home. And I had to ride a bus, which I think today bus travel is not what it used to be. It doesn't happen as frequently. And I hadn't been on a bus very many times prior to that. So I didn't know that when you get off the bus, there's stops in between, I guess we stopped in Pennsylvania, if I remember, going from New York to Ohio, and you don't get a assigned seat. So I got off the bus and I was feeling stuck, triggered, and crushed. I was devastated that this relationship is not going to go anywhere. And it was my first. It was my very first heartbreak. And 15 or 20 minutes later, when it's time to get back on the bus, and I just couldn't wait to get back home to Ohio. And I realized I didn't have a seat, that other people had boarded the bus, and I don't have a seat. And the bus driver said, "We're leaving. If there's no more seats, then you have to wait for the next bus, and the door's closing." So this created, as you could imagine, a lot of anxiety and some confusion. And I did something a little, in retrospect, is kind of funny. I mean, not that I was hurting so much in heartbreak, but because I was hurting and in so much heartbreak, I decided to give a speech in front of the entire full bus. It was like this monologue about like how I have got to get home, and I'm so hurt, and I'm so crushed. And the reason why I'm laughing is not at me for the fact that I was trying. So I was very sincere in my monologue, but that the look on the face of all the people sitting there, because I was asking someone to give up their seats, and the look on their face was, "We don't care." And I don't hold it against any of those people. It's okay that they didn't care. And I was very lucky because the next bus came 3 or 4 hours later. It would have been much worse if I was stuck there for 24 hours. But in that moment, I was transient. I was between places. I was asking for help, and there's no help. And I was waiting and waiting for something to change, and nothing changed. It's almost like time stood still. In these examples and this experience of stuck, what I'm talking about is really being disconnected from resource, and that you just don't know how you're going to get through. It can feel like a kind of helplessness. And resources, anything that we use to function in good health. This includes both inner and outer resources. These can be qualities that we possess. For example, internal resources are clarity of mind, if you have clear seeing, because the opposite of that is confusion. A resource could be confidence. The opposite of that is getting bogged down in self-doubt. just being able to identify that you have choices. I'm sure you know what it's like to be faced by a heartbreak, and you just you just don't feel like anything's even possible. There's no choice. We also create stories, and we project those stories onto situations and other people, and that can very much cloud our mind and our thinking. And so even a resource is being able to identify when we do this. Perhaps you have creativity about you. You can access and tap into your creativity. That is a resource. And then one of the most important resources is compassion, being able to extend some kindness or gentleness to yourself or to others. What an incredible resource. Now, examples of other outer external resources are community connections, feeling like you can remember those people on the bus. And I was trying to ask for help and no one was able to help me, which is fine. I don't hold a grudge after all of these years. I really don't. Perhaps meaningful work. If you feel a sense of purpose in your life, that's a resource. What about a safe home? The story I told, I was very lucky that my mother, still to this day, lives in my childhood home, and there's something incredibly comforting knowing that, about a place to rest and recharge. Also, a resource, external resource, is access to therapy, and we know very much that not everybody has that access. What we're learning to do is to identify what are the resources and how do we activate them, because we need to use them in order to get through this experience of being stuck, triggered, and crushed. Now, triggered in this context means disconnected from calm. And you know that phrase, peace of mind? Well, what I'm talking about is peace of body, a calmness in your body. When you're feeling bothered, you're feeling provoked, your nervous system is dysregulated. This is what it's like to be triggered. There's a kind of machine feeling, a preoccupied, an anxious spinning in your mind. A friend of mine, he calls this bees buzzing in his chest. And those bees sometimes go to other parts of his body. His body vibrates. And I don't know if you know that experience too, that the anxiety, feeling triggered, is that you're just unsettled. It feels like you can't be in your skin. Sometimes I also think about it in terms of like, I just feel like I'm on fire. And when we're not triggered, we're grounded, we're centered, we're neutral. So learning how to act in a way that approaches the body with an interaction. We call it titration if we're talking about trauma work, this activation. We move towards it, the intensity, and then we pull out and take a break. We take a breath. And then we return to being able to give it attention, to move closer to that intensity, and then pull out and take a break. And it's this practice, it's this breathing in and out that helps our body come back into some state of calm. Now, the word crushed, stuck, triggered, and crushed, this is about heartbreak. This is about disconnected from relationship or disconnected from connection itself. There's a loss that has impacted you, a loss of a relationship, and you're living brokenhearted. And perhaps you know this experience. It just feels like you're shattered, you're fragmented. Many of us use the word broken. So grieving our losses, maybe we could just say all therapy, any kind of counseling or coaching, it's really about letting go of old self and saying hello to a new self, letting go of the past and coming into the present moment. It's this hello, goodbye, goodbye, hello, this working and reworking what you thought was going to be, the connection, the relationship, thinking that there might be some kind of permanence. That word forever is very, very dangerous to those of us who have a history of attachment injuries. And when a relationship ends because they're impermanent and they end, we just find it so incredibly difficult to manage. It's like scaffolding, like built around a building. It helps you orient to the world and create structure and figure out how to maneuver. And when a relationship ends or some great loss breaks your heart, that internal scaffolding just implodes. It falls apart. And you're left feeling directionless because you don't have a way to orient. There's this great tension between those two places, this transition place between I'm here, but I'm not here. I once was there. I'm not quite here. I don't know if I'm coming and I'm going. It's living in this transitional place, and it feels very, very groundless. The word that we use is liminal, and liminal is about the in-between space. And I love the image of a trapeze artist, because if you think of a trapeze artist holding onto one particular bar, flying through space, flying forward, and there's another bar coming towards the trapeze artist. And the instruction, the plan of what they're going to do is they're going to reach out one arm while the other arm is still holding the original trapeze bar. And at some point, they're going to let go of that trapeze bar that's behind them. But they're flying through space, the other trapeze bar is coming towards them, and they need to grab onto it. But they haven't quite grabbed onto it. Imagine we just take a photo of them, and they're suspended in space and time, and there's no net underneath, and they're just stuck there, not quite holding on to the trapeze bar of the past, and not yet having grabbed onto the trapeze bar of the future or the next chapter, but the in-between space, suspended. And this is often what happens to us during loss, during grief, feeling crushed, when clients come to see me. This experience happens because of some relationship or an absence of relationship, that attachment bonds have been threatened, were threatened, compromised, or even broken. And that when the relationship ends, it really feels like I end. That some of us just can't handle these endings. I'm remembering on the bus, I was such a mess. I fell apart so it was crushing. And I've had to learn that when attachment bonds are broken and that I can't handle those type of endings, that I have to find within myself a new resource or a new spirit or a new sense of self that will allow me to go on. But until I find that new sense of self, I'm still stuck, suspended in that air, just like that trapeze artist with no net below me. And it activates an extreme fear. And sometimes that's a kind of fear of abandonment. So I'm asking you in this moment, the question is, well, how do you handle endings? And what happens to you? Do you get stuck, triggered, and crushed as well? We could explore that all therapy, counseling, and coaching is about some form of relationship repair. It's also about processing grief. And so this means that we're repairing relationship to others, we're repairing relationship to family, and also, of course, repairing the relationship to yourself. And this also includes going beyond people, relationship to places and belonging. This is relationship to work and purpose. It's also relationship to pets and to nature. We can go deeper into an existential perspective. This is about the transpersonal. We're talking about going beyond, even into spiritual relationship. Transpersonal means just that, beyond the personal, that you just sense there's something greater and bigger than you, that there's something more. And perhaps you're familiar with the terms spiritual bankruptcy or spiritual emergency. This means that life has a sense of crisis of meaning. And what we're going to do then in therapy is we start looking at your relationship with suffering itself. We want to look at your relationship to trauma and to abandonment. And when we do, all of these come up with the question that many of us have in our heart, that many of us are living with, like, why me? Why this kind of despair? Why me when it comes to this depression? Why me that I have this history of attachment trauma? And healing really includes grappling with that question and trying to understand, trying to assign meaning and make sense about something that often doesn't make sense. It's living with a tragedy that will never resolve itself, but we make peace that we can't resolve it. And this is about existence itself, as in not what is the meaning of life, like generally or theoretically, but what we're asking, like really personally. It's like, what is the meaning of your life? Or of course, I ask it to myself, what is the meaning of my life? And if we can't answer that, then chances are that we're living in a crisis of meaning, and perhaps feel directionless, that life is dull, that there's like there's no zest or inspiration. Shakespeare's Hamlet is doing the same thing every time in that monologue. He says, to be or not to be, that is the question. It's really questioning existence. And these are big life concerns. When it's just you alone at night in a room, staring at the ceiling, riding a wave of anxiety, feeling like you didn't get what you need or want. And you ask yourself, what do I want and need in my life today? And that's what we're doing in therapy. That's what we're trying to get one step closer to the clarity of these answers. So yes, stuck, triggered, and crushed is how people come to see me. Stuck, triggered, and crushed is a reoccurring theme in what we're doing. This is why people reach out to me, and maybe also this is why you're watching this video. I mentioned repairing a relationship to yourself, and this would include repairing parts of yourself. And let's explore this idea a little further. When I was working at a hospice as a bereavement counselor, I created an art therapy exercise called Faces of Grieving. Now, quite honestly, it's not that original. It's just an oval, draw an oval on a piece of paper, and we're drawing a face. However, the face doesn't need to be literal. You don't have to actually draw, eyes and a mouth. It could be representational. It could be symbolic to capture how you're feeling about your grief. And sometimes we could draw faces of grieving 3 or 4 times a day, and they change. Our grief is changing and evolving. There was one example of there was a person in the group who did draw a face, but it was kind of like a Picasso face, where the nose was in a different location and the lips are where the eyes are, and the eyes are where the ears are supposed to go. And there was this spiral drawn on the front. And the participants were asked to title your face of grieving, but also write a few sentences, or write a paragraph about what it means. And the person who did this, they wrote, they feel scrambled, that when there's a loss, when there's grief, when your heart is broken, you feel like you just feel so discombobulated and out of sorts, and you feel scrambled. Now, there was another one. It was about being broken and fragmented, and it looked like a mosaic. It was like a collage of ripped out pieces of colored paper, and they were all put together like a stained glass window, and they were glued, and it did make a kind of face image. And the woman who created it, she said, with grief, you're really confronted with all these fragmented parts of who you are, and you don't know which ones to keep or which ones to get rid of. And you have to sit and meditate or contemplate and do a lot of life review to put the pieces back together to figure out who you are. I love the image of like panning in a river for, maybe you're panning for gold or minerals, but just if you scoop up the bottom of the river and there's a pan with holes in it, and the water is coming out, and you see the pebbles, and maybe there's some sea glass in there, and sticks and fragments of leaves. And you just sort through and trying to figure out what are the categories, what part of you do you want to keep? What part do you want to let go of? If you're repairing your relationship to yourself, you're really trying to reclaim or find, to discover and rediscover yourself. Sometimes we use the word resurrecting, which is a powerful word because it means bringing back to life. You might feel so disconnected from yourself that a part of you has died. You're shut down. You're an empty shell. You don't know who you are, or have forgotten who you are. Many of us lose ourselves in a relationship, so we know what it's like to live lost. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about an identity that's lost. Some of us have become so overly identified with, let's call it, a manufactured persona. We've had to embellish who we are. And what I mean by this is that it's the development of the false self. We perhaps have a history of shame. We got messaging, very strong messaging that said, you cannot be you. It is not safe to be you. We don't like you. We don't like parts of you. So can you just hide those parts? And in fact, maybe you are even rewarded for not being yourself. And it's the opposite of it, to be punished. Maybe you were punished for being yourself, and you realize real quickly, I'm gonna cover it up. I mean, this is what socialization does to us, or parenting. It's socialization or parenting gone wrong. The world is just hostile towards you, and there's a such an overarching sense of unwelcome. You're not welcome to be you. So what you figure out is you're just going to hide who you are, and you develop these skills of deflecting and distracting. We develop a false self, and here we start believing this false self to the point that we behave in a fake way. And when we internalize this false self, what it means, internalization, it means that we actually think it's real. We start believing our own game. We get confused and think that we are the false self. It's like a performance, but we don't realize that we're performing. This is incredibly empty. What ultimately we're really disconnected from a true source of self. And the thing about a false self is that it's very fragile. It collapses easily like a house of cards, and that this manufactured self is precarious. Now, when relationships end, my experience of this is that I end. I'm so overly identified with a false self that I don't have the grounded foundation and centered place of knowing who I am. And so I'm really externally referent, or the experience of having others tell me who I am is so much more important, that if the relationship ends and the other person goes away, it feels like I go away, because this fake self, or this false manufactured persona, it just falls apart. It's unable to hold me together. And that feels like I'm dying inside. And it took me years and years and years to understand, oh, that's attachment trauma. That's what happens. There's a poem by Anne Sexton that I like, and the line that she says is that the end of the affair is always death, which I know sounds dramatic, but I'm not being dramatic as far as that's my experience. That when the relationship ends, it's like I'm dying. And I've never quite understood for many years. I didn't understand how other people could get through loss, because I just couldn't get through it. It was as if grief would explode in my heart. It's like this bomb goes off in my chest. There's a painting that I've seen. I've seen a picture of it. It's I think it's Victorian, or the style of this woman is in Victorian dress, and it's of her torso. It's just her upper body, and her chest is on fire where her heart is. There's this blazing plume of dark smoke, and you can see some flames are like eating away at her. And when I saw that photo, I immediately identified, like, yeah, I know that. I know what that's like. It comes with a kind of derealization, which means like nothing feels real, or a depersonalization where it feels like you don't exist, or dissociation, which means you don't feel you're in your body. And I love the phrase annihilation of self, which I know sounds ridiculous or funny thing to say. I love annihilation of self. I don't love the experience of it, but I love that there's a term, because my background is in contemplative psychotherapy. I've studied psychology of Buddhism, and in meditation studies, they talk about this annihilation of self. If you sit long enough and you practice working with your mind and you practice being with yourself, you start to unravel. And the interesting thing for me is that when I've experienced this through meditation is the fact that, well, actually, I've experienced it through grief and loss and heartbreak and suffering and trauma. And that's when I noticed the annihilation of self. So the truth is, we're always becoming. The confusion we have is that the self is permanent, solid, fixed, and rigid, when in fact it's impermanent. It's always evolving. And this is great news, even though that feels like we don't have ground, or it can feel confusing. But that gives us the power of maturing and growing and evolving. The false self, however, this fixed self, that's based on trying to control your image. And if you're trying to control it, you're trying to be perfect. You're trying to be something that you're not. Maybe you have a persona that's a bit of a people pleaser. Maybe that you have to always project that you're in charge, or you're strong, or you're successful. Grief and loss shakes all of this up, and this idea of falling apart, needing to reinvent yourself, realizing that you don't know who you are. So this process of annihilation of self, it's been going on since the beginning of time. It's not unique to you, but it feels personal and unique. But this is how we grow and how we evolve. And this is what is meant by calling it a rebirth process. So compassion is so necessary here, gentleness and kindness, because the amount of pain, when you really wake up to the intensity of this, your sense of self just like falling apart and unraveling, and you're simultaneously trying to make sense of whatever loss or relationship ending that's happened. And just like when I was on that bus and I'm transient and waiting, and I'm the trapeze artist just floating in space, no ground. If that's you, then compassion to you, because this is not easy. And all of this is why, we keep this to ourselves, because there's not too many people who are going to understand this process of transformation. That this experience of falling apart often is done in isolation. It feels incredibly lonely. You feel directionless, and you feel profoundly lost. And if you're the only one in this place and you don't know what's going on, like me, multiple times, many years ago, the first few times this happened, it's extremely frightening. It's pretty upsetting when you realize that who you think you are is not who you are. Now, you don't need, all of that being said, you don't need a relationship crisis or some great suffering through heartbreak to discover that you don't know who you are. Many of us are just going about our daily life, pretending in our relationships, pretending that we got it together. But in fact, we don't have it together, and that we really feel lost. And if this is you, no judgment at all, that these are neutral observations. This is not a diagnosis. What this illuminates, these are all adaptive strategies that we figured out how to survive. But unfortunately, they're not sustaining us. And it doesn't matter how successful you are at holding it together, how many people that you have around you, how busy and distracted that you keep yourself. Some of us just keep ourselves going and going and going. Busy, work, and just kind of projecting this image of like, I'm so strong. I'm a strong person. I'm going to get through it. But deep down, you also feel fragile. And deep down, you know that something is missing. Something is fundamentally wrong. So it might feel like you're covering something up, like you can't truly be yourself. And if you're living life guarded this way, it's very painful. I like the image of a zombie. You're living dead. You're not in your body. You're dissociated. You're going through the motions, living on autopilot, going about your day. You go to work, you pick up the kids, you run errands, you get dinner, you get up in the morning, you go to bed. It's just this, it's that reoccurring cycle that life just feels empty. And maybe you run into someone at the grocery store, someone that you know, and they say, "Well, how are you?" And you smile, and go, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you?" But you're not fine. you know, you're pretending at being fine. And of course, it's perfectly okay that you do this from time to time. Who doesn't? We cover up, we obscure the truth. But some of us get so caught up in this, "Oh, sure, I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah, I'm fine." And 5 years pass, and 12 years pass, and 23 years pass. Our whole life passes in front of us, and we're just kind of pretending at living because we're so disconnected from our body, or we feel empty inside. You spend your life pretending, and you know that that's not life. That's not living. It's like you're living life against yourself. It's a form of denial. It's a form of self-abandonment. And the kind of not fine that I'm talking about, it's something that most people don't talk about and don't fully get or understand. There are not too many places that you can be this honest and drop down into this level of suffering or existential pain. And this is why it comes up in therapy so often. And you don't have to pretend any longer when you come to therapy and you're able to reveal that about yourself. That if therapy's working, if you have a connection that feels safe with the therapist, you get to be yourself, and there's a freedom in that. And when you have an underdeveloped false self, it creates a very deep longing to be seen and to be found. You want to drop this charade of the pretending, but you don't know how. You don't know if it's safe. And it takes a lot of work to keep this going, this manufactured false self, this pretending. It's quite exhausting. There's this tension, this internal tension between wanting to put it down, wanting to be seen, but there's also a discomfort in receiving being seen. That also is a chapter of healing work, and therapy is to allow yourself to soften enough to let in the goodness of what it's like for someone to truly see you if you have a history of not trusting that those other people in history, through our relationships where we were hurt, through the mirroring that they gave back to us, they mirrored who we are as a person, said there's something wrong, or that mirror is not reliable. So when we finally find, in this example, it's therapy, doesn't have to be therapy, but if the therapist mirrors back to us who we are, it also takes strength and skill to be able to receive being seen. And this is why in relationships, oftentimes it's hard to let in love. That many of us with attachment injuries, we want to be loved, and we're practicing giving generously and graciously and working with intimacy. But at the same time, it's also uncomfortable because you're exposing your vulnerability, and self honesty is uncomfortable. We want to be seen, but we also are resistant to it. It's as if like we're behaving avoidantly attached with ourself. This is why seeing a therapist is edgy, especially if you find one who sees you. Now, I had a therapist many years ago, and he fits into this category, and I forever feel profound love for him because he loved me. And very early on in our work together, I was in a session, and he worked out of his home office, and he just says, "We're going to play hide and seek. You have to hide. Go." And he started counting: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Now, I know that this sounds non-traditional. He did happen to be a dance movement therapist, but mostly what we did was kind of traditional talk therapy. But he incorporated these kind of exercises and these interventions. And I had never done this before, but I got off the couch. I just instantly jumped up and said, "Okay, I guess we're playing hide and seek." And I found myself not finding a terribly great hiding place, but I went in the kitchen and I got underneath the kitchen table, and I'm waiting, and I hear him in the other room, 22 Mississippi, 23 Mississippi, 20. He's counting. He goes, "Here I come." And he happened to have dogs, and I don't fully remember. I'm not saying like the floor was dirty, but in my memory, like I can see the dog bowl, and there was like, maybe little bits of dog food on the floor, and I'm underneath the table in, oh my gosh, it was just a little weird, right? But what happened wasn't weird. It was beautiful. It was powerful. And he came to find me. He said, "Alan, where is Alan?" And if I really do it fully in this moment, I could cry. It's very moving to me. And he got down on his hands and knees, and he's looking at me underneath his kitchen table, and he says, "I see you. I can see who you are. You are found." And his eyes, the look on his face, as silly and weird as this kind of exercise was, what made it all believable was his sincerity, and the look on his face was caring compassion. He sensed in me, he knew I was lost in my sense of self and in my life, and he knew I needed to be seen and be found. And so he created this exercise in order to do that. What he taught me is that the wound of being ignored, the wound of not being seen, or the wound you don't matter, it becomes the wound of not being able to recognize yourself. And in that moment, it all made sense. It all made sense. The failed relationships, the picking partners that were the wrong partners, chasing love, accepting crumbs of affection, getting involved in one-sided relationships, where I wasn't able to be myself. I had to hide. I created relationships where I had to keep hiding who I was. And I picked people who didn't have the skill to see me. The question to you here as we talk about it is, what part of you is lost? And what part of you needs to be found or recognized or needs attention? Life has a deep sadness when you do not know who you are. It is this feeling that something is just always missing. And the drive, this drive to find the healing path is the drive to find yourself. And this drive is a resource. It links to a resilience. Resilience is the ability to seek out more resource. It means that you're looking for a solution. And if you've gotten this far in the video, I wouldn't be surprised if you have this spark of spirit about you, this resilience. And what I mean is that you're called towards growth and healing. It's an innate drive to find relief in life suffering for whatever is aching in your heart. And I bet that you believe in change. Believing in change itself is a resource. We can be at the end of our rope. We can feel lousy and hopeless, and yet still believe change is possible. If your journey has been anything like mine, that you've had these ups and downs, some successes, some losses, and that you've pursued healing work before, this is not your first time, and maybe you sought out therapy before. And similar to me, if you keep bumping up against a wall, it's like an edge, and there's this obstacle, there's a dead end. That wall is pointing towards important, sincere questions that are in your heart. And all those questions have the word how. Like, how do we heal? How do we change? How do we love? How do we get what we want? And how do we find others who want the same things that we want? This is why clients work with me, because we pursue the how, a unique, tailored, finding steps that define how you're going to get to the other side. And the other side in this instance means your relationship struggles, your attachment distress, your unintegrated trauma, or more broadly, the fear, anxiety, and depression that floods your brain on any given day, created probably by family history, or maybe addiction, or abandonment, or childhood neglect. However you define getting to the other side, no matter the origin or its name, Our goal is to get there, and pursuing how to get there. That's similar to what people say about wisdom. And this idea that, like, well, that wisdom is already inside of you. It's part of your basic inheritance as a human being, meaning that the answers that you seek are living inside of you, and that it's your job, as challenging as it is, as challenging as it sounds, you have to access them. I personally like the image of clouds covering over the sun, and your inner wisdom is like the sun. It's a power source, yet we get disconnected from this source. And you know what that feels like when you can't access your wisdom and you're in a state of confusion. And your daily life, you know, it's missing the sunshine. We feel overcast, we feel gray, we feel diminished. We feel, back to what I've already talked about, disconnected to our true self. And this reminds me of a poem, Allen Ginsberg's poem, Sunflower Sutra. He's speaking directly to, there's this old sunflower, it's dried out, it's dead, and it's towering alone next to railroad tracks. It's like an urban, not a really pretty sight. And all of a sudden, there's this dead sunflower next to the railroad tracks, and it's covered with black soot. And sunflower seeds, he describes, they've fallen out of its face, and he calls it toothless. It's lost its smile. It's lost its zest for life. And I like to say, like, as a love letter, like he's writing this love letter to this dead sunflower. He's feeling determined by its sorry shell of existence. He's wanting to right a wrong. There's a fundamental misunderstanding about this beautiful sunflower. And the poet says his words, he says, "Poor dead flower, when did you forget that you're a flower?" And I borrow those words right now for you. Let's wordsmith them. I adjust the words. I ask, when did you forget who you are? When did you disconnect from your truth? When did you abandon yourself? I have been doing this work for 20, almost 24 years, working with clients, collaborating, hearing stories, hearing about suffering, bearing witness, holding despair. And I've spent even longer holding my own. So both professionally and personally, here's what I have learned. I want to boil it down to its most core guiding principles. I have learned to trust these three insights, and they very much inform how I work with clients. So number one, I call the message is in the mess, which means that we discover deeper truths about our existence and about ourselves when we are able to sit with pain's discomfort, listening for what it's trying to teach us. The question that comes out of that is that if your pain is a messenger, then what is the message? The second thing I've learned, number two, is that relief is in the grief, which means knowing ourselves begins when we feel the pain from life's losses, rather than holding it in or trying to avoid it and push it away. The question here is, if grief is a mirror, then what face do you see in its reflection? What are you learning about yourself in the face of grief? And then number three, that the process is the path, which means healing isn't about arriving at some final destination tomorrow, but about finding growth in each step that we are taking today. The question for you now is that if the present moment is your teacher, then what are you learning? My parting invitation and encouragement right now is for you to discover your own similar guiding principles. So please go inward, tap into your wisdom, and find the sunshine shining behind the gray clouds. Access the next step. All you need is one step, just the next one, and that you can take that step today towards your healing. And I know for some people watching this, maybe for you, the next step includes reaching out to me and working together. I welcome hearing from you. I hope that the ideas in this video gives you a sense of direction, maybe a little inspiration about what is possible. If my words and stories resonate with you and you're curious about getting on the calendar, then please reach out for support. I am here to help improve your relationships and, yes, with others, but more importantly, the relationship that you have with yourself.